All right, let's dive into a story that starts with an invitation to a party, a huge royal wedding, actually. But this is not your average fairy tale. This is one of Jesus' most intense and prophetic stories, a real roller coaster of grace, rejection, and some pretty shocking consequences. Today, we're going to break down the parable of the wedding feast from the book of Matthew.
At its heart, this whole story poses a question that should make every single one of us stop and think. What happens when the most important invitation you could possibly get is not just ignored, but treated with pure contempt? Well, Jesus lays out the answer, and let me tell you, it is a serious warning.
Okay, so the story kicks off in verses 1 and 2 of Matthew chapter 22, and it begins in a way that many of Jesus' parables do, with a setup we can all picture, a powerful king throwing this magnificent wedding feast for his son.
Right from that very first line, Jesus gives us a huge clue. That phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like, well, that's our signal. We need to listen up because this isn't just a simple tale. We're in an allegory now, where every piece, the king, the son, the wedding, it all stands for something much, much bigger.
Think of this as our decoder ring for the whole story. It's pretty straightforward. The king represents God the Father. His son is, of course, Christ. The wedding feast itself symbolizes getting into the kingdom of heaven. And this next one is absolutely crucial. The first people invited, the ones called the bidden, they represent the house of Israel. You got to keep these symbols locked in as we go forward.
So the king's got this incredible feast all prepared, and he sends his servants out to round up the guests. You'd expect everyone to be thrilled, right? Scrambling to get there? Yeah. The response is not at all what anyone would have expected.
It's just a flat-out, blunt refusal. They would not come. But notice the king's reaction here. He's not instantly furious. Instead, verse 4 tells us he sends out other servants with an even more pressing invitation, describing how amazing the feast is going to be. He's actually giving them a second chance.
So what do they do with this second chance? It's not even a polite no, thank you. The text says they made light of it. It's just complete indifference. Their own stuff, a farm, a business, was just more important than a personal invitation from the king. Basically, they were just too busy with life to care.
And this is where the story takes a really dark and violent turn. It escalates from just shrugging off the invitation to outright deadly hostility. A specific group called the Remnant doesn't just ignore the messengers, they physically attack and kill them. This isn't just a story detail, folks. This is a very pointed accusation Jesus is making.
Now you have to understand, Jesus' audience would have caught that word remnant immediately. It wasn't just some random word. It referred specifically to the descendants of those who had come back from the Babylonian exile to rebuild Jerusalem. By using this term, Jesus was basically pointing his finger right at the very people who were listening to him.
See, this whole idea of a remnant was woven deep into their history and their scriptures. Prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel had talked about this special group, saved by God to carry on his promise. So for Jesus to say that this same remnant was the group murdering the king's servants, well, that would have been an absolutely shocking and deeply convicting thing for them to hear.
After this brutal rejection, the king's patience is completely gone. The parable now makes a hard turn, shifting from a gracious invitation to swift and terrifying judgment.
The king was wroth, and that's an old way of saying he was absolutely furious. His response is total. He sends in the armies, destroys the murderers, and burns their city to the ground. Now, this isn't just a dramatic turn in the story, it's a prophecy.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective, and it's pretty chilling. Jesus tells this story in Jerusalem around 33 AD. Fast forward less than 40 years to 70 AD, and the Roman armies do exactly what the parable described. They march in, destroy the city, and burn its temple to the ground.
This wasn't just a coincidence. The parable was a direct warning, a clear foreboding of the catastrophe that would fall on that very city for rejecting God's messengers, the prophets, the apostles, and, in the end, the Son himself.
But believe it or not, the story doesn't end there in destruction. The king's feast has to happen. So, with the original guest list totally scrapped, the king issues a brand new, radical command that changes everything.
The king declares the original guests were not worthy. So now, the invitation is thrown wide open. He tells his servants, go out to the main roads, the highways, and just invite anyone and everyone you find. The exclusive invitation has just become an open one.
So what happens?
The servants go out and gather up everybody they find, both bad and good, and the wedding hall is finally packed. At this point, there's no more test of your family history or your social status. The only thing that matters is that you accept the invitation.
And this part of the parable perfectly maps onto the actual history of the early church. First, the apostles took the gospel to the house of Israel. When that message was largely rejected, you see people like the Apostle Paul step up, and his whole mission was to the Gentiles, the people out on the highways. And just like in the parable, many of those servants, the apostles and the early martyrs, paid the ultimate price for delivering the king's invitation.
So we've watched this story shift dramatically, from an exclusive guest list to an open invitation, from a chosen few to absolutely anyone who will listen. It's a powerful picture of God's grace, but it's also a stark warning about the consequences of rejecting it. The story really forces us to ask, what does this radical change tell us about the kingdom of heaven? Is it a kingdom of birthright or one of open invitation? And maybe more importantly, when that invitation comes, how are you going to respond?